quite the welcome. So there we are. I could just say already I'm in the Hebrides today, so I'm on the Isle of Coll. So it might suddenly I suddenly go a bit strange. That's probably I can see the mast from here, but I'm on a 4G connection there. I do have to say that I spent from 7 till 9 this morning do a cyber exercise, a worldwide cyber exercise. I then spent an hour with my mother moving a sheep and a lamb, and now I'm back to talking to you. So that's sort of typical island life for you. And I can see Ingrid on there. So hi, Ingrid. I can see you probably has to understand that kind of island life. Anyway, that's me. As you say, lots of stuff there. So we'll move swiftly on from that. So what I wanted to do today is just give you some thoughts on exercises. So we're not going to do a sort of formal session of, this is how you do an exercise, or this is how you do the various elements of the exercise. But I want to talk you through some ideas, just really throw out some ideas there that hopefully might trigger some thoughts with you. Or I'm quite very happy in the feedback session, come back to me and Charlie say you're talking rubbish, or I don't like that, or, wouldn't be better to do it that thing. So very happy to be challenged. I think for those of us, I know there is someone, especially the public sector, who are on full tilt still supporting doing the COVID response. So there seems to be a little bit of almost divide in the sort of public sector who are involved in, especially local authorities who are involved in the response to COVID, looking after the population, doing quite a lot of the kind of day-to-day manage of it, where a lot of us maybe in the private sector or business, where the main seemed to be the time where people were actually managing and doing the business continuity response was maybe the first 2 or 3 months. Once everyone got home and were working from home, it's a little bit of the debate where some people were involved intimately on the day-to-day management or the week-by-week management of the ongoing management of COVID, like doing the social distancing and all the sort of things that had to happen. But many people had sort of, after that initial response, and I kind of feel that, is COVID a BC incident? I think, of course, it was at the beginning, but once everyone's working from home, is that really the business continuity element is over? Because the new normal is working from home. And, I know that lots of people will be preparing to go back into offices or whatever the new normal is on offices. But again, is that a business continuity incident, or is it a kind of health and safety? Is it a facilities management bit? So I think with this, I think a lot of organizations, maybe senior managers, are going to say, well, we've done a real incident, we don't need to practice, which is maybe true. But I think there is things like, we'll talk about the cyber threat that hasn't gone away, and that seems to be escalating. Sort of, you wake up in the morning and there's more and more different companies had a cyber incident. So just because it's COVID doesn't mean the cyber has stopped. So can you get another incident at the same time? And I think there is also, for some of you, I don't know the CCA regulations for local authorities and the emergency services. I don't know they've been suspended for COVID, but those of you in the regulated space, financial organisations and others, I think the regulations will not stop. So they'll still expect you to do your exercise regardless of COVID. So I think for some, COVID will be an excuse for some of the senior managers, maybe don't want to spend the budget, maybe don't want to spend the time. But I think for others, I think you should be exercising. And I might say that because I sell exercises, but I do think you really need to continue on your exercise program, because the experience of COVID is one type of scenario, but there are going to be different types of scenarios out there. So that's the first one, COVID and exercising. My next thing, and I'm not quite sure, this is a slightly random order, but I think COVID has given, I think, a little bit of a excuse to review and look again what is our capabilities and what are we trying to plan for. And it is interesting as business continuity people, a lot of our time and effort was spent looking after buildings, and what happens if your building burns down. It was the sort of typical scenario, or I use that as a typical event to explain what business continuity is about. And lots of people are now turning around and saying, well, you know, we sorted that. So, you know, why are we doing business continuity? And I think one of the things we need to have a look at is what are our solutions, or, you know, in the old GPG 2013, it was called strategies. But I think, and this ties in with our exercise, I think we need to look at what are our strategies, and then actually in terms of exercising, are we convinced we know they're going to work? And I call them capabilities rather than strategies, because, you know, a capability is not just having, you know, having a work area recovery contract. Is actually the ability to take our people out of our call center, whatever we use for work area, to take it to a new location and actually operate from there. So I think we need to have a look at our capabilities, to list them in this way, to say actually what can we do and what can't we do, and then use exercises to validate them. So if we got incident teams, incident response, do we know our teams are actually fit for purpose? Do the people know they're on the team? Sometimes I've seen people have no idea whether I'm on the crisis management team or not. And are they ready to go? Are they up to date? Do they know what they're doing? You know, if they've not been involved in response to COVID, and actually, and, you know, have they been practicing or have they not? So we need to look at our incident management teams. Work area recovery is something I think is going to die out. And there is always a guy from SunGard who's brilliantly, I think it's SunGard who's brilliant at telling us all the good reasons why work area recovery is very important. And I think it is important in some cases. But I think, you know, if you do have a work area recovery, then I think you need to make sure that that capability is validated and you can actually use it. I think we need to make sure that as we all come back from working from home to working back in the offices, or a hybrid solution, which seems to be the way quite a lot of people are going, do we keep that capability, or do, you know, lots of people have had laptops bought for them. When the laptops go out of date in 2 years' time, are people going to say, I'll give them a desktop or give them a different sort of laptop, but you can't work from home? And is that capability getting lost? And, you know, you've got your disaster recovery. If you got, you know, often I see in plans, oh, we're going to do cross-skilling so that them can do this thing and they can do that thing. Can we swap over in emergency? But do we actually ever check these cross-skilling actually work? And how do we prove that that capability is in place? Maybe things with suppliers, you know, substitution. So, you know, if we lose a supplier, can we find another supplier? And do we actually know how that's going to work? And do we know the fine detail? Does the substitute supplier even know that they're a substitute supplier? So I think one of the things in exercise is, if we're looking in the whole, is I do think this idea of having an audit of our organization's capabilities, and to be brutally honest with our senior managers and say, actually, this is the stuff we can do. This is the stuff we quite like to do, and to do the difference. And the stuff we say we can do, how do you validate it so that if you ever have to implement it on the day, you're not going to say, well, actually, we never practiced that with no idea, and it's not surprising it failed. So think about that validating solution. Think about doing an audit of your capabilities and then checking whether those capabilities are actually working. So there's some things to exercise. This was a little bit of some work I did on, if you have a call center and their recovery is to do a recovery site, this was some just thoughts about how do you verify that solution, And how do you check that the whole of it is done? You know, because often people do, they have a moving from the call center to a recovery site, might not be necessarily, you know, a SunGuard type work area recovery. It might just be another of your offices and you might displace some of the people there. It's not sufficient to me to actually just check that, or just as to the incident management team, have a wee exercise where we've done a desktop exercise for a couple of hours. Yeah, we've verified it. We've had all the people do it. And is that actually verifying the solution there? So what I think to do in this one, you need to break it down into its component parts and then think about how do you validate each component part so that you can absolutely be guaranteed it's going to work. So I broke it down into 5 exercises. So one of the first exercises might be, which those of you who know us, is our famous outside now exercise, where you actually you do the evacuation of the call center, you take the people outside and actually do people know how to start this exercise, how you manage the people on the ground, and then how you would actually start to go about moving to the recovery site. So you can do some sort of short exercises to make sure that all members of staff are aware of they're going to move to the recovery site, and that they are sort of mentally prepared and they know that if your building burns down and they are going to go to recovery site as opposed to home, then they know where they're going to go, how they're going to go. They've thought about the route to there, you know, if it takes an extra half an hour longer, how they're going to cope with it. So they are aware of that solution and they're not going to just say, well, I can't do that. You know, I've got to drop my kids off at school and I'm not going to turn up till 9:30, you know. So you've thought through that and make them aware of that solution. Your exercise 2 might be with your incident management team, and it might be around actually how do I manage this recovery. So those are the people, you know, it could be call center, you know, tactical team, or sorry, call center operational team, and they are going to look at how we're going to manage this, how we're going to liaise with the recovery site, how we're going to liaise with the people on the ground, how we're going to book the buses, whatever else needs to be done. So we got an exercise with our exercise team. Our exercise 3, if we're going to go from a call center recovery site, one of the exercise might be to verify that you can actually log on at a different site. If it is to use somebody else's computer and you have the ability to log on at any site, then maybe every 6 months you might want to send someone to the recovery site. Maybe only need to be one person who trundles along and they try and get onto a computer and they check that all the functionality they need is on that computer. Because sometimes it could take 5 or 6 hours for their profile to download. It could take time. The computer might not have all the right software on it. And you know, it might have worked 6 months ago, but someone has reconfigured it, and then you need to check it. So that's a nice simple exercise. It doesn't take hardly any organizing, might only take half an hour, but again, it's verifying that solution. We've got our telephony person here, and that looks like a he, might want to practice switching the telephones over between the sites and actually checking that someone on the recovery site could actually take a phone call. So you might do that at the weekend. You might get a couple of people pretending they're calling in. So you open up the telephone lines and they're not normally open. You get some people to call in, you get some people at the recovery site and check they can take the telephones. So maybe something you might do once a year, once every 6 months. But again, the whole point of flicking the telephones to a call center or a recovery site, that's absolutely key. And if we don't actually just practice that bit of validate that bit of plan, you know, however much exercise 2 you do is not going to check that you can actually move the telephony. And then the last exercise is exercise 5 on our list, is actually checking that and it's putting the whole thing together. So we might say there's 100 people in our call center. We might take 50, put them on a bus, tron them across the recovery site. We might get them all working at the recovery site for an afternoon, and then we've validated that we can actually take live customer calls there. So you might do that every 3 years because that's expensive and that may be disruptive. But in the end, you know that you can actually do it. So you brought all the bits together. So, you know, if you're a large, complex organization, this is quite a lot of work to try and get all these solutions together and think about all the different component parts. But as a business continuity manager, you want to check that all these bits work, because, you know, it's you don't want to be the person who kind of, you know, we've been paying you for the last 5 years, you've done exercises and all that, and actually when the time comes to implement all the stuff you're doing, it falls on its face and doesn't work. And so you want to make sure that all these different bits work together. So that is one of the bits about exercises, validating all the different bits. And as I say, they don't all need to be sort of 3-hour set piece exercises like exercise 2. They could be as simple as somebody just going across location and logging on the computer and just checking that their logon works. This is about incident management teams, and we did some work with an incident management team, and did lots of training with them, and they were pretty good the first time. We did the same exercise a year later, and they just gone backwards. They got worse. And this was some continuous improvement work we did actually with a government organization, with the idea of trying to say, how do you measure teams getting better? So how do you make sure that, because you can do you can do an exercise, and however rubbish they are, or however brilliant they are, you can still get 20 points out of it, or 10, you know, exercise learning points. But there is no measure of whether the team is deteriorating because you've had changes. You know, your experienced team has now left. The people won't turn up for training. They won't engage with you. And then you run an exercise and they're hopeless. And how do you say that or tell them? So this is some assessment work we did, and it consists of a little bit. So I had a look at all the different things incident management teams should do, and I boiled it down to about 5 things. So the team assessment was about whether the team worked together, whether the team were engaged, whether they made good decisions. So that's the team assessment. We had a look at the plan and say, was the plan fit for purpose? Did it do all the things the plan's meant to do, or was there missing information in there? If we taught them some incident skills and demonstration, then we were expecting them to do this. Maybe we showed them how to use an agenda, or how to log, or how to do situational awareness. Then had they actually demonstrated they do that, or they have just ignored the training. Key bit, as we all know, communications. So were they good at identifying their interested parties and communicating with them and getting the right messages there? Did they use the plans and procedures that we had in place? And recovery management is, did they actually solve the problem, and did they use the plan and the solutions in place to solve the problems? And you can see with this bit here, so that was year on exercise Hermes 2015, and then we get an improvement the year after. And sometimes team assessment is sometimes politically difficult in terms of organizations. Are people happy to be assessed? Are people happy to be, if you're a large organization, you've got multiple operational teams, are they happy to be sort of formally assessed? So what we did with this one, we always assessed the team, not an individual. And some of the, if you can see down here, some of the assessment was by umpires. So we had 3 umpires, and then you had someone from the organisation, one from Plan B, or maybe a couple from the organisation, one from Plan B. And some of the team assessment, and you can see there how the questions were done. And some of the team assessment, we actually made them self-assess them. So some of the questions around, did the leader lead? Were you involved in decision making? Did you know what was going on? So, you know, the assessment was what they felt, rather than, you know, purely by the leaders. And then you can see top left here, that was the questions there. You can see the score because we aggregated them up. And you can see, you know, what the level was. And sometimes you can also have in there, you know, strengths and weaknesses, and then you can pinpoint areas for team improvement. So, you know, if we look at this one over here, I might highlight to the team and say, look, one of the areas you need some improvement is you have no idea what's in the plan. So you're not using the plan, and some poor person has spent, you know, hours, days of their life writing this thing. So we need to maybe do some more training, maybe do some more awareness, maybe to, you know, sit down with each member of the team and just go through the plan. Maybe they don't even know there's a plan in place. So again, with this thing, you can demonstrate and you can see how your teams are doing, and you can actually see improvement over time using the assessment. So this needs to be kind of focused on your organization or whatever things are important to you, but and it needs to be, I think the other thing, it needs to be sold in the right way. Because if they think, you know, oh, we're going to assess all different teams and, you know, sack the 2 worst ones or something, that's not the way to do it. So it needs to be sold in the right way. Those of you in financial institutions will know about operational resilience. And so we did an operational resilience exercise last week. So it's SCA and PRA requirements. What is interesting here is one of the things you have to do is you have to define appropriate scenarios, and they must be plausible but extreme. And then you have to check whether, and you have these things called impact tolerances, you have to check whether the scenario, you could still operate within your impact tolerances, or actually you need to put more resilience in there because this particular scenario, which has to be extreme but plausible, so it must be plausible, that would actually take your impact tolerances out. So I think in the financial world, there's a push greater on exercise, and a push debt is almost like you have to prove your capability, and you have to do your scenario tests that actually work. And also, we know in business continuity, we long preached the thing is we don't do scenarios, we do loss of an asset, so loss of building. That's what we sort of did our risk one. And now we're going back full circle to actually the scenario we did for this client was extreme flooding in India, which would have an impact on their functions. Then, you know, we're going almost full circle back again to having a look at scenarios. So I think there's going to be more scrutiny of exercising and more scrutiny of what are your scenario tests, and actually the regulators checking on them. Tons of cyber exercises. It is the flavor of the moment. And, you know, people are doing lots of exercising. I get a bit depressed about the price that some people charge for cyber exercises, but there we are. If they can get the money, why not? There is, just don't forget in cyber exercises, there is the technical exercise where you need to have the kind of red teaming, get the flag kind of exercising, or there is the reputational management crisis type exercise, and quite often they're kind of 2 separate bits. I just think in cyber exercises, if you look at cyber responses, and I've written quite a lot on this, people make the same mistakes again and again and again. They're poor communications. They don't think about their stakeholders. And so there's lots and lots of training and exercise you do. And, you know, your senior managers, your CISOs of this world, they're the ones who get sacked for this. So push them to try and do cyber exercises. There's a quick plug for our training. We're doing that's the National Cyber Security Centre. There's a 2-day training course in cyber incident management, and that has an exam now. I'm not sure the next course, I think there's one before March next year there. So that is certified by the National Cybersecurity Centre. So do get some training on this. Do go out and see this, because it's such a likely area for many of you. And the cyber guys who are doing this, and women, are damn good at it. They make a lot of money doing this because they do it well. So you're dealing with professionals here, and you need to be professional in your response. And we've seen that sometimes you maybe can't prevent them getting into your systems, but you can manage it well if the incident happens. So, and that's a little that's one of the slides from the training course that we do. So do your cyber training exercise, because it is the sort of #1 threat for everyone at the moment, or seems to be, and the damage it can do either reputationally or just on your organization, and the figures it costs with people are pretty huge. So pushing cyber training and exercising. My last one here, this is rather similar to the incident team framework, and this is looking at individuals. So what this is doing is a little bit of work looking at, say, if you're a member of a team, you know, you wouldn't be allowed to go out and drive on the road without doing a test that you're competent. And if you look in oil and gas, they do competencies of incident management, but you could be MD of a multi-million-pound business. You could, if you have a bad incident, you could wipe billions off your value. You could have people die. You could have a major reputational issue, and there is no training or no standards or nothing there. And if, you know, your senior managers don't turn up to exercises, how do they know that they're ready to respond? So what we did is looked at this and said, what does each individual know? So this can be tailored to whoever it is, but, you know, what knowledge do they need to know? Because there's certain things you might want to know in your organization. What does the strategic team do? What does the silver team do? What does the operational team do? So there is some sort of key knowledge which they need to know. What experience have they got? Have they done 2 or 3 exercises, 2 or 3 incident, or they never done an exercise in an incident? If you want to know that. What capabilities do they have? So have they taken part in some things? So they know how to log, they know how to do different items in incident response. Are there any particular skills that you've taught them, or particular skills to your organization which you're required? And the capability, sorry to just elaborate on that, is also about where you have capability. So you've got a cyber response plan, or a work area recovery plan, or a disaster recovery plan. Do they understand how to operate that plan, how it works, and could they implement it? And lastly, these are, you have your incident team leader, you might have your HR representative, your finance representative. And for the HR person, they may have trauma not trauma counseling, but trauma management after incidents. That may be their responsibility. So what you do here is to say, actually, that might not be their day-to-day responsibility. So are there specialist skills that they need to do, or knowledge that they're specialists to role? Or your comms person may actually might not do media stuff because they just don't do that. So so there's some skills there. Now, what you can do there is to gain a questionnaire. 0 means I've got no knowledge of this thing. 4, I could teach it and I know it really well. And then with a number of questions, you can get down to a score. And again, what for me this is key is then if you get your people to do it and it done at the right attitude, you say, look, you don't really have an awful lot of knowledge because you just know. So I can see a gap here, so I can give you training because you need that knowledge. And you might find there's 5 or 6 people who require some knowledge training where, you know, on experience, some people might need experience, but it means your training is not one size fits all. You can focus on some individual areas and upskill people and know where the skills gaps are. And if someone new comes into your incident management team, you can make them do the competency framework and then check which areas they need. Now, one of the things I opened this up for a little bit further to do was to say, actually, in business continuity, how do you prove your return on investment? To say your budget is £10,000 a year, how do you prove that budget is spent wisely? You know, what are the key indicators? And, you know, you might have to do an exercise, but you know, or if you want to improve, is that doing 2 exercises or is it doing 1 exercise just a bit better? And how do you prove you've done 1 exercise a bit better? So what I like about this is you could take all your people in your incident teams and say, we assessed them all, and overall, you know, the average score was 3.4. And what we did is we did a whole load of training, and then a year later, they were 4.4. So you can actually use these scores to say, look, we spent some money and we sent people on training, or we got trainers in, or we did exercises, whatever else, but I can actually demonstrate to you some return on investment, and I can actually show we get better, rather than just say we did the normal program again. Well, is it improving? Is it getting worse? I don't know. So think about that as a way of demonstrating return on investment. And last slide there, because I'm cantering through this and I want to have some questions. This fine gentleman has written this fine book on short business continuity exercise. And apart from being a plug for my book, I do think the little and often exercise route, and that's why I kind of wrote the book, is one way to go. So, you know, I did a sort of senior management team today, and we struggled to get 2 hours and struggled to get them all to attend for the 2 hours. And you know, that's 2 hours every year and a half. So what we need to do here is to say, well, look, that's the nature of the beast. They're busy people. Why not see if I can do 2 half-hour exercises or 2 hour exercises, which are more likely to get them, more likely to turn up than to get them for 1 2 hour exercise a year or even 3 hour exercise a year. And there is in the book, there is exercises at all levels, so strategic, tactical, and operational, so that you can do those little and short exercises, which just gets people thinking, gets people going, instead of just saying, oh, we have the annual exercise and, you know, that's all we have, and everyone forgets everything in between that. So I've done a sort of a very rapid canter through that. So is there any questions or thoughts or anything else?
Charlie, thank you very much for that. And I'm really glad you touched on the piece regarding return on investment. I think one of the things we've all got right now as business continuity professionals is the ear of the executive. It's been quite hard for us in general to really justify what we do at times. And I think something like COVID is a fantastic time, now that we have their attention, now that we have their buy-in, to really implement a more structured exercise program. But I think one of the other challenges all organizations are facing right now is just how cash strapped we are after a very expensive and costly protracted incident. So thanks for mentioning that, and I'm really glad you touched on that. Folks, the floor is yours. I'm going to turn off the recording of the session just now. Really, this is a very rare opportunity to speak candidly and openly with someone who quite literally wrote the book on business continuity, as you've just seen there. So with that in mind, if you'd just like